Hey guys! So what you just saw was a video of 15 high-rise buildings being demolished simultaneously. This event took place in the summer of 2021 in the Chinese city of Kunming. All these new, non-hazardous buildings that cost millions of dollars to build got demolished. Why? Well, in short, China is in big trouble. The demand for Chinese goods around the world has suddenly gone down. The yuan is at its lowest level in years, while China's largest cities are drowning in debt. All of this is happening against the backdrop of increased tension between the US and China, and the concentration of enormous power in the hands of one person, President Xi Jinping. The myth that China will soon overtake the United States is falling apart before our eyes. So, what is it that went wrong for this country? Why is China actually much weaker than it seems? That's what I'll be talking about in today's video. So let's start with the known facts. China's GDP amounted to 17.7 trillion in 2022, which gives it second place after the United States, 23 trillion. The incredible growth rate was predetermined mainly by the huge reserve of cheap labor. In 1981, China's population reached 1 billion. At that point, the authorities adopted the policy of one child per family. For 35 years, it was forbidden to have more than one child in a family in China. Women who violated this rule were forced to have abortions, got impossible fines, and were evicted from their homes. This policy also changed the ratio of men and women in the country. Tens of millions of Chinese men can't get married, causing the birth rate to plummet. This policy caused disastrous results. In 2022, the population of China decreased by 850,000 people as compared to 2021. The last time the country's population decreased was in 1961, when a terrible famine claimed the lives of tens of millions of Chinese people. After that, the population in China had always been increasing. It was only recently that the Chinese authorities started to understand the implications of their one-child policy, and it ended in 2021. But it was too late. China's population has aged and continues to age. Now, 20% of the country's population are pensioners. China can no longer rely on its famously cheap labor force, which, combined with relatively liberal economic policies, was actually providing this company with trillions of dollars of investments and incredible economic growth. As the number of able-bodied people decreases, while the need to maintain the high pace of the economy remains, China has no choice but to squeeze the maximum out of its working population. But it's only getting worse every year, as the number of retirees increases, and there are fewer and fewer people left to finance pensions and healthcare. Of course, the burden falls on China's youth, which simply cannot handle it. 80% of all factories in China are already experiencing a shortage of labor, and the Ministry of Education predicts that by 2025, the labor shortage will reach 30 million workers. Population problems are only a part of what China is going through right now. COVID has also come as a big blow to the country. I'm sure you're aware that this country has been most affected by the pandemic. The Chinese authorities implemented the so-called zero-tolerance approach to fight the virus. But once again, things didn't really go according to plan. Just think about it. The basic premise of this policy was to put absolutely everyone on lockdown. The extremely strict measures of the Chinese authorities had hundreds of millions of people locked in their homes for months. Sometimes the building doors were welded shut in order to prevent people from breaking lockdown. Drones were used to deliver the bare minimum of food necessary for survival. People were forcibly removed from their homes and placed in specially built quarantine camps. Needless to say, the consequences for the economy were disastrous. The service sector, manufacturing, and tourism, everything came to a halt. Half of all highways in China were closed down. Seaports were working inefficiently. This huge enterprise is the world's largest iPhone factory, which produces 70% of all iPhones in the world. Due to the government's COVID policy, tens of thousands of factory workers were trapped inside it for many long months. People even dared to hold protests, which is an unprecedented occurrence in China. Thousands of factories across the country found themselves in a similar situation. Millions of people lived and worked in them without the ability to leave the premises. Now we're gradually getting to the most interesting part. Look at the people in these pictures. They are all currently living in unfinished, high-rise buildings. There are no windows, water, electricity, heating, or toilets. In this photo, a woman is carrying water she collected from a local pond up to the 14th floor. The 67-year-old man has to go down from the 13th floor every time he needs to use the public toilet in the building's courtyard. Take a look at the unfinished ghost towns. Can you believe this is really happening in China? It's all the result of a massive crisis in the Chinese real estate market. Real estate accounts for a quarter of China's economy. Therefore, what's happening now poses a serious threat to the entire system. It is a known fact that in China, it was a common practice for developers to sell unfinished apartments to continue financing construction with the money they received. But at one point, the authorities issued a law that severely limited the possibilities for financing large developers. Large construction companies found themselves on the brink of survival. It got to the point that in 2021, the largest Chinese investment holding company, Evergrande Group, defaulted. People began withdrawing their investments in housing en masse, which caused the construction companies to suspend construction. This is precisely why there are so many ghost neighborhoods in China. People who invested their last money into an apartment often have no other choice but to live in such unfinished buildings. However, the Chinese authorities are not particularly concerned about these people. The government is more focused on global economic problems. Beijing's recent measures may temporarily help large developers avoid default, but they can't convince people to buy unfinished housing again. Such a crisis in the real estate market is a result of extremely misguided economic decisions made by the Chinese government, which shows that the politicians leading the country are definitely not the most talented and often make mistakes. Previously, there used to be competition between different groups of influence within the party, which allowed for the promotion of more talented officials. However, due to Xi Jinping's usurpation of power, the party officials whose predominant characteristic is unquestioning loyalty to the leader Xi, rather than business acumen and professionalism, began to come to the fore. And now it's time to talk about China's biggest problem. A problem that could lead to the country's collapse, and one that the Communist Party of China will never be able to solve. What was the first thing Xi Jinping did after becoming China's leader in 2012? He took all the top officials to visit museums of China's national history and proclaimed new commandments for every Chinese person, essentially stating that restoring China's historical glory is the main task of all Chinese people. In other words, China has embraced the revanchism ideology and the brainwashing began. Propaganda has reached incredible proportions, while the party's total control has only intensified. There is constant electronic control over all spheres of life. It's important to understand that no business can feel comfortable in such conditions, and thus, more and more private companies are becoming state-owned. Just think of AliExpress as an example. The government planned to nationalize it due to a conflict with its founder, Jack Ma. Beijing has tightened regulations in a number of industries, particularly affecting tech giants. For instance, the Alibaba company lost half its worth during this period. China's largest tech corporations lost incredible amounts of money. Kaishu Technology, minus 104 billion. Ping An, minus 66.1 billion. And Tencent, minus 65.4 billion. China's investment rating on the international arena is currently at an all-time low. Because of the policies of the great leader, more and more large and small companies are leaving China and moving to countries like Vietnam, India, and Thailand, where there is also a lot of cheap labor. It makes sense that not many investors would want to invest millions in a business, knowing that the government could change the rules of the game at any moment. Now add to the mix China's position regarding the Russian invasion of Ukraine, which began with Xi Jinping's blessing, so to speak. China's leader was obviously counting on a quick victory of the aggressor. China hoped that it would thus gain additional leverage in dealing with the so-called Taiwan issue. Given the escalation of tension around Taiwan, it's not unlikely that Xi Jinping will attempt to seize the island in the future. The denial of Taiwan's independence is now enshrined in China's constitution. Experts note that any move towards invasion would cause significant damage to the global economy. It would also increase China's isolation and bring it closer to direct military confrontation with the US. One thing is clear. There's a high chance that China's economy will face a slowdown. According to official sources, the country's GDP only grew by 3% in 2022, falling short of the target of 5.5%. The export sector of China's economy traditionally exceeds 40%, which makes the country very dependent on the decline in demand in Europe and the US. This is a consequence of the small size of China's middle class, which is supposed to be developing domestic consumption, but is simply negligible in percentage terms compared to the rich and the poor. The global consumption crisis caused by the prolonged war in Central Europe is extremely disadvantageous for China, which is why Xi Jinping proposed his peace plan, which turned out to be far from realistically achievable. So here's the question. Do you believe that China's incredible economic indicators are actually true? Think about it. The only official source of data on the Chinese economy is the National Bureau of Statistics in China, which is under complete control of the ruling party. Officially, the economy of China grew by 3% in 2022. This is a very low growth rate, especially considering that over the past decade, the economy has grown by an average of 8% per year. However, independent experts suggest that the reality is even more dire, and that the economy actually grew by 2 to 2.5%. The problem here isn't even with the National Bureau of Statistics itself. Remember that China is thoroughly permeated with the desire to please the party leaders. Thus, every director of a state-owned enterprise is primarily concerned with reporting high figures, regardless of the real results. There are known cases when the data was distorted when leaders of the local party cells changed. It was done to ensure that the new leaders showed better results. For example, at the end of 2015, there was a case when one Chinese province reported income that was 127% higher than the actual figure. Over the past decades, China has created an image of a powerful country confidently moving towards global leadership. However, few people have noticed how many weaknesses this country actually hides behind the impressive economic indicators and grand infrastructure projects. China is no longer the leading country that seeks to catch up with and surpass America. Well, that's all for today, friends. Like the video? Let me know if you learned something new in the comments, and let me know if you think China created the COVID-19 virus. And we'll see you next time.